Good afternoon, everybody. So the short talk, which is very informal, is about the context and vision for the GovTech research cluster at the IVI. So I'll start by describing briefly what we all know, which are the challenges of modern government. One of the things I like about this slide is that I presented it in a conference called Provi, which is about collaborative networks in Torino, Italy, in September 2019. And one of the things I was highlighting then was about the global health pandemic. And shortly after that, you know what happened. COVID hit, and we're still in it up till today. So, but generally speaking, governments, from time to time will have to attend to some of these, pressing, challenges: global health pandemic, immigration crisis, climate change, and natural disasters, like hurricane, and etc. So these are all things that any modern government, grapple with, and the rate or frequency of these incidents, may actually increase, with time. So, but that's not all, the story. And when you look at this in a more general way, most governments will need to develop capabilities to be able to attain their specific sustainable development goals. So most of us will be very familiar with the SDGs, which cover things from poverty alleviation to elimination of hunger, provision of good health and well-being, education, gender, water, smart communities and environment, responsible consumption, climate change, life below water. Then, of course, there are two SDGs that are really very closely related to governance, particularly 16, which is on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And you also have 17, which actually supports the implementation of all these goals. So in a more concrete, a way, those areas are global challenges or areas where governments need to address specific goals, which is related to peculiar challenges that they have, right? So that's a more general sense of what, challenges governments actually face. And governments, of course, are responding. So and we've seen a lot of innovations in the way governments, respond. And what we can say is that we see government responding by developing more collaboration across different governance jurisdictions, whether they are, they're national, across national, levels, or across regional borders, or even, within levels of government within the same country. We're also seeing government responding by developing new partnerships. So government working, for example, with private sector, working with international organizations, working with civil society organizations to jointly address some of these challenges, because government doesn't really have all the capacity or resources in the first case to actually address them. And in doing so, they also use a number of disruptive technologies, such as big data, Internet of Things, AI, robotics, drones, AR, VR, and other new technologies to create new services and develop, some more capabilities for more effective policy making. But to use these technologies, there's a need for government itself as an institution and as an organization. Each agency is considering them as organizations. There's a need for them to really create that enabling environment, right? So even if a government agency would like to use, for example, an AI or VR or big data, the capacity needs to be there. The environment that will enable the adoption of such technology needs to be created. And this is where the whole idea about the so-called post PM, New Public Management Frameworks, actually comes in. So New Public Management Framework was a really, very popular public management principles or framework that was very common, right from the early 80s, maybe even up till just before, before the year 2000. So, and the whole idea with the new public management framework is for government agents to be able to operate like businesses, where efficiency is the key driving factor, and specializations is actually what was the key driving factor, or one of the key mechanisms, for achieving some of the new public management, goals. But it was obvious that after a while that was actually causing more problems than creating solutions. So some goals were achieved. Of course, government departments became very specialized, and they could do things very efficiently. But when it came to solving complex problems that actually require joined up thinking or cross-agency solutions, it was actually very problematic. So there were this new waves of thinking about how to really organize things better, within government, and that's what I refer to as, post new public management frameworks. And these new public management frameworks actually are creating this enabling environment, because one of the things that is common to them is that they actually exploit technology a lot in terms of how they think about public management. And there's a form of duality that, of course, is enabled by that, because these post-NPM frameworks are very technology-centric. They create and because of that, it creates the environment for implementation of technological innovations. And implementing those technological innovations actually strengthens those post-NPM practices within those organizations, because results are obtained, and those results actually help in institutionalizing some of the practices there. And of course, those post-NPM frameworks, at the end of the day, strengthens government institutions, and technology innovations through those post-NPM as well, of course, indirectly contributes to strengthening government institutions, which is really the core of SDG 16. If you recall the slide that I just showed. Of course, a stronger government is able to better execute or carry out its functions in supporting addressing citizens' needs and making good policies or decisions. There are a number of this so-called post-NPM frameworks, but I'm focusing on three of them that are really very common and very complementary, and this data era governance framework, the public value management framework, and new public governance framework. The data era governance frameworks, aims at reintegrating the siloed, government departments. They try to reorganize things based on the needs of citizens, and there's a lot of activities in the area of digitalization or data transformation. And PV, and public management, actually focuses on obtaining public value. So there's a public value focus in terms of service delivery or policy making. And in the new public governance framework, the whole idea is how to create collaborative networks with non-state actors to actually tackle some of the very complex or wicked problems that we have in government. And in this slide, I just elaborate a bit more about the characteristics of this environment. So you can see, for example, when we talk about data era governance, some of the things that the paradigm enables is you have greater access to information. You have more government data, publicly available, to businesses and citizens. Enabling citizens to better express their opinion, through channels like social media. Possibility for government to crowdsource ideas and co-create solutions with citizens in tackling societal challenges and providing shared service infrastructure. And in the area of public value management, we have a lot of, we have focused on public value creation. We have focused on long-term outcomes and not just short-term outcomes. And there's also the environment that allows public managers to actually be able to come up with very creative, and innovative solutions, out-of-the-box solutions, which is always a problem in the public sector, the public sector space. And one of the reasons for that is that there's a lot of, it's a very risk-averse environment, and there's very little incentives, for highly creative, solutions that are risky, even though the gains may be very high. So traditionally, you will not have government environments, just being very, very open, for any form of radical innovation. New public governance is particularly very important because that's actually what enables that the collaboration between state actors and non-state actors, and possibility of co-production of services and policies, say, with citizens. Now, like I said, those frameworks I've just described are critical in creating that enabling environment for GovTech paradigms. If you look at the various technologies that we have, we can roughly cluster them into three categories, what we can call as hyper-connectivity related paradigms, GovTech. We can talk about the ones that focus on smartness, and of course the ones that are very linked to what's called, or we can think of as AI augmentation. So in the area of hyperconnectivity, you could really view that as the convergence of internet, mobile, social, IoT, cloud computing, from what people call SmartKit, as an acronym. You could also look at, and what characterizes that hyperconnectivity is you have information-rich environment, data is being pumped out, every second, either from people to machine to machine interaction, and it's just a very data-intensive environment with a lot of ongoing links, amongst both people, and machines and objects within the whole environment. And then you have for smart technologies, the whole idea is having a forward-looking and efficient resource management system, having participatory governance and citizen engagement within those environments, or technology that actually enables that is what we describe as smart technologies. And then we also have interorganizational collaboration, information sharing, integration and opening up of government, and of course the public services. So technologies actually enables that. We describe them as smart technologies, and of course, obviously you start seeing, of course, links and relations between these categories of technologies, and I'm going to address that in the next slide. And then of course you have the AI augmentation, which is essentially use of AI related technologies in the government and space. All right, and they're used for a number of things, like for example, for automatic question answering, for automation of completing forms, translation, and of course for drafting, for automatic drafting of documents, for example, like legal documents. So again, there's this what I describe as the GovTech Retrospective Triangle. So all these are related, smart government innovation, hyper-connected government innovation, and AI augmented government innovation are all related, as I've described here. So while in hyperconnectivity, you have a lot of data being produced, and generated, AI actually helps in analyzing some of those data, and you apply them, for example, in the context of the smart government innovation. So it actually uses all the the innovation resulting from the integration of hyperconnectivity, related technologies, and say AI and say advanced analytics, for example, and solutions. And when you look at the convergence, a number of things are possible, and again, these are conceptual, frame models that actually describes all the patterns of things you see, but in a more compact way. So you begin to, if we look at convergence of post-NPM and GovTech paradigms, we see the possibility for hyper, open government capabilities, do it, yourself government capabilities, and hyper collaborative, government, capabilities. Right? So we can discuss some of these things, and later in the Q&A sessions. But the main idea is to say, look, this, opens up, our government, creates very strong, links between, government and citizens, and one government gets to the other, etc. And also enabling government to become a platform, for either business, citizens, and other non-state actors to actually, create new services, and contribute, to to policy making. But those GovTech related, technology innovation come with a lot of, also come with some negative side effects, or there's some unintended consequences that are always associated with the use of these technologies, which I'm sure, again, we know. And so for those GovTech related technologies to be adopted successfully in government, there must be a number of issues that need to be resolved. First, there must be clear principles to resolve ownership of individual data, making up a large amount of data that is actually generated in hyper-connected environment. We talked, for example, about social media. These are social media data, and if you collect data from Twitter, for instance, if government is trying to harness maybe data from Twitter, say, to inform policy making, which is done a lot, you discover that once you if you try to crawl data, from Twitter, or you end up with having a lot of personal information be collected, and so knowing how to really manage that and deal with that is extremely key. So that and again, and the way that's done needs to be very transparent and more important, preserve the privacy of the subjects. There's also the amplified security threats that's connected with some of these technology, particularly when you talk about hyperconnectivity and the use of cyber physical systems, say, within government environment, smart government environment. We have seen we're still reeling from the effect of the cyber attack on HSC. So every day we get crazy calls now. I can't tell you how many strange calls I've obtained today, maybe probably through the leak of phone numbers, now that's available, that may now be available, for example, in dark web. So these are real challenges, there, and of course the ethical use of this technology is also very key, and there's also the issue of infrastructure that's going to support trust when we talk about this highly dynamic and reconfigurable collaboration networks that the use of this GovTech technologies also enable. So to tackle some of those issues, and to be able to harness some of the opportunities and to be able to create the enabling environment that is required within government, as part of the research that will characterize the GovTech cluster, we'll be looking at we're looking at 4 strands at the beginning, at least for now. And the first strand will aim at just creating that enabling environment, all right? So we're going to be looking at some of those post-NPM, and frameworks, looking at the mechanisms that they actually offer that will make the adoption of GovTech more viable, more viable in government environments. And then we also have the second strand that will look at hyper collaboration networks for public governance. So what are the kinds of services, infrastructure that will be required for governments to collaborate across agency boundaries, across governance levels, so that they can address public governance needs. We're also going to be looking at in the third strand, platform for self-service government. So government as a platform essentially, but again that links up, that will be linked to how, for example, businesses, governments, society organizations can, for example, use data that's produced by government, or harness the APIs that governments actually provide, to create services for themselves, to create new services for the public, or as source of data, for example, for them to really contribute and engage with government in co-creating solutions to problems, or even contributing to policies, for instance. And then the fourth strand actually looks fundamentally at GovTech itself as an artifact and tries to understand the affordances, all right? So, and one of the things with affordance, with the notion of affordance, in technology, in study of technology, is that the affordances of the same technology, is different in different environments, because the actor that is trying to use that technology brings in, something, that will be required. The notion of affordance is relational. So the use of AI in a particular government agency, may produce results that's completely different in use of AI in another government agency. So in this particular strand, we'll be looking at what kinds, of affordances do we see with a particular technology, and what are the set of conditions, that are there to that enables some specific kinds of outcomes to be achieved across different government environments. So that's the strand. I have detailed description of these, which will be available on the government on the cluster website shortly. But before I close, I would like to again just highlight how you can get in touch with us at IVI. So you can always contact us at through info@ivi.ie, and in contributing to any of the areas I've just described, or other research clusters, which have been presented before, and which of course we'll present in the coming weeks and months. All right, so that's it for now. So I would be happy to take questions, comments, and feedback regarding the research strands and all the things I've presented. Okay, so let's see if I can.
Hi, Boyega. May I ask a question?
Please.
GovTech cluster.
Yeah.
And then I have a question related to the targeted industries to have collaboration with them, because you have been introducing 4 different strands over there. Yeah. And I was wondering what industries you're expecting to approach you.
So essentially, most of the work so far has been with government agencies, and specifically in the health domain. All right. There's also some ongoing engagement, with DEPA in an advisory, capacity. All right, with Department for Public Expenditure and Reform. So these are the partners so far have been on government agencies, but like you've seen in the presentation, definitely companies are very key to realizing a number of vision and to be able to successfully execute some of the research strands, because they develop the technology in the first case, and they have to work with the government agencies to be able to deploy them in those environments. So those relationships are currently being built. We did a GovTech survey in Ireland last year, and that also enabled us to connect with a number of companies, which we're going to go back to and see if we can establish collaboration and with them. I think in future series of this lunchtime meetings, I maybe present some of the outcomes and some of the concerns that government agencies also have in contributing or participating in some of this, either research or actually engaging with government. In first case, you see the pattern usually is that you have the big companies working with government, agencies, and that's an issue. So SMEs and smaller companies, it's been very difficult for them to really engage. This is tied to some of the challenges of public procurement processes and their costs and related costs. So that barrier is a bit there, which makes, having companies in general, particularly smaller ones, SMEs and smaller companies, to really, engage in terms of the GovTech innovation in the country. That's something that really came up a lot in our studies, and which we've noted, and which we are also trying to understand better by discussing with the government on how they can, have ways of promoting collaboration, not just with the big, say, consulting companies, the Accenture, the PwC, or the Microsoft and IBM, but smaller companies, and to engage as well, in GovTech, innovation. So, and that's why you may not see so many of them. If I was going to put up names again, we're going to put in the same names of the big companies that everybody know. But I personally feel that's not necessarily, the way to go. I think the way to go is to also see how some of the smaller companies that actually have good solutions, that government can actually benefit from, to see how we can enable them participate in the whole, GovTech, innovation environment. Not just within Ireland, it's a major problem globally, but in Ireland particularly, this is the case, and that's why you don't see so many names of companies, there, because there's just this barrier, currently in terms of how they engage with government.
Yeah, can I maybe more comment or question? I don't know. So first of all, thanks, Boyega, for the presentation. That's a great cluster research direction, and GovTech I think is really important around this, and also I think the innovation around digital transformation, and that's I think from the Innovation Value Institute, I think digital transformation in the public sector is a really important aspect. And coincidentally, I just attended this morning a conference in Germany about digital transformation in the public sector. And there were two things what they mentioned. So one was actually quite interesting, surprising, about that they also look at, for example, China or other regions for innovation in the public sector. So apparently technology adoption and this is well advanced also in the public sector there. And then the second one, and that might be something, and I missed it kind of somewhere in the four strands, is one of the challenges in the public sector is to, first of all, attract good talent. And the second thing is even having the pool of talent, so who understand the public sector and how it really works. So it's a really kind of that public sector technology, digital transformation seem to be a really skill shortage.
No, that's true, and I think that's a big issue. There's been this so-called hollowing out effect of government. That's one way to describe it, where which is and one of the reasons for this hollowing out is simply because the government's actually finding it increasingly difficult to attract new talents, and the old ones have to retire anyway. So it means governments are now looking for ways to rethink how they work, by collaboration, and with other parties, and that's why the aspect of collaboration is becoming so key and so important, for government. It's and that's the one way they've been responding to that particular challenge. That does not remove the problem. There's a need to attract people, but it just emphasizes also the role or the importance of things like knowledge management, in those environments, so that they can actually retain some of the experiences of the very skilled, say people that spent more time, much more time, within government. Maybe say through technologies like what do you call it, chatbots, etc. So within the enterprise. So the government's actually trying to tackle that indirectly. But again, I agree with you, Marcus. That doesn't completely remove the problem. Government agencies are addressing that challenge, in different ways, either by making, the positions that they have, or a bit more attractive, to, of course, in fact, they're creating new positions that are really very professional, and that mirrors what you will have, for example, in the private sector. So having data scientists, for example, working in government now is nothing, we're beginning to see that, which you will not, have seen before. What you may actually see, you see a classic AI, it's like the IT department, and then they outsource those specialized, services, to the company, and they get it. But now, you actually see data scientists within government agencies. We're studying two tax authorities currently as part of our RC, project, and that's something that is very interesting. So we're beginning to see, diverse, new kinds of skills, within, for example, say a tax authority, where not have seen those kinds of skills, say like 2, 3, 4 years ago. All right. So there are a number of measures and things that are being considered, but in addition to that, I think government is also, most of the government agencies are thinking about collaboration as a way to alleviate some of those challenges, and of course better knowledge management practices. So that's what we've noticed. But we will definitely. It's something that we should consider, and like I said, those are our initial I would say offerings, but they can grow. I mean, as we have people that we want to collaborate or we want to pursue such strands, we'll be happy to add them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's also where the Innovation Value Institute can support with that international network. And yeah. I think, as you mentioned, collaboration is probably the key to this. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah.